welcome viewers. I'm Pia and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. US President Donald Trump's steep 50% tariffs on Indian goods have come into force weeks after Washington slapped an additional 25% penalty over New Delhi's Russian oils and arms purchases. The move puts India among the world's most heavily targeted economies. Denmark has summoned the US chargé d'affaires in Copenhagen after accusing Washington of attempting to interfere in Greenland's affairs. The Danish foreign minister has stated that any external meddling in the kingdom's internal matters is unacceptable, stressing close cooperation with Greenland's government. China's foreign ministry has urged Washington to end what it called the groundless harassment, interrogation and repatriation of Chinese students. Beijing has stated that it hopes the US will act on President Trump's commitment to welcome Chinese students. The IDF claims that the double-tap strike on Al Nasser hospital, which killed at least 20 people, was aimed at a camera positioned by Hamas. In response, Hamas has slammed the IDF report as baseless. Tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets in Israel on the day of disruption to protest. They are protesting for the release of the hostages. The families of the hostages are demonstrating in front of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office. Meanwhile, Netanyahu has emphasized on continued offensive in Gaza until the end of Hamas. US President Donald Trump is all set to chair a meeting on Gaza at the White House later today. Meanwhile, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar will also be in Washington and will meet the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The discussion is likely to focus on post-war plans for Gaza. US President Donald Trump has yet again threatened Russia, indicating that economic sanctions may be implemented if Russian President Vladimir Putin fails to agree to a ceasefire with Ukraine. A new poll shows a majority of French citizens want the parliament dissolved and fresh elections held. The finding comes as Prime Minister Bayrou faces a confidence vote over his proposed budget cuts. All right, viewers, those were the headline, and our top focus this hour remains towards the Middle East. We're now learning that multiple blasts have rocked Gaza overnight as US President Donald Trump prepares to chair a high-level meeting on the Gaza crisis at the White House. This follows comments by US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who has stated that Washington expects Israel's war in the Palestinian territory to be resolved by the end of the year. Witkoff has also noted that Israel is open to continuing discussions with Hamas and that the group has signaled a willingness to reach a settlement. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is also scheduled to meet Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar separately in Washington as diplomatic efforts are now intensifying. Joining us on the broadcast is Mr. Peter Baum. He's the foreign editor of Weekly Blitz. He's joining us live from London. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. A lot of high-octane developments have been taking place in the Middle East over the last couple of days. We're now learning that multiple blasts have rocked Gaza overnight. This comes after the strike had taken place at the Al Nasser hospital earlier. And now we're learning that US President Donald Trump is going to be chairing a very, very crucial meeting, and that Marco Rubio will be meeting Gideon Saar in Washington, D.C. as well. What do you think will catalyze in this meeting? What are your expectations from this crucial meeting that is going to take place?
Yes, so the feedback that I have had overnight from my sources in both Washington and in Jerusalem are as follows. The Trump administration is going to allow the Netanyahu cabinet to fulfill their objective of doing as much damage to Gaza City as is possible and they are going to give them a time frame in which to achieve this objective. Now, I've heard various reports. Some have said 2 weeks. Others have said until the end of the year, the end of by December 31st, 2025. So the feedback that I'm getting is very mixed at the moment. But clearly, the Trump administration has given the green light for Netanyahu and his cabinet to continue the devastation in Gaza. And overnight, the Israelis assassinated a very senior Hamas figure, which amazingly has not hit the Western mainstream media yet, a gentleman by the name of Mohammed al-Aswad, who was in charge of security for the whole of Hamas, having taken over one of the roles vacated by Sinwar when he was assassinated. So Israel is having some success, a great degree of success, I should say, in eliminating the hierarchy of Hamas. And we can see this because I think it must be now 4 or 5 weeks, forgive me if I haven't got the exact time period right, since Hamas actually fired 1 rocket into Israeli territory. So the feedback I have is that Trump is still going to allow Netanyahu to fulfill his objectives, but the time frame in which he is going to be allowed to do this is very vague at the moment. I'm not sure, through my sources, whether it's as small a period as 2 weeks or maybe 3 months down the road.
Indeed, Netanyahu's end goal is to ensure the complete purge of Hamas from Gaza, especially because they've been targeting Israeli civilians for a very long period of time. Meanwhile, we're now seeing protests raging within Israel itself. Families of hostages have also come out to the streets. They're outside Netanyahu's office. They're demanding that he reduces the offensive, pulls back and secures a deal with Hamas for the release of hostages. The families are claiming that the lives of the hostages are being endangered with this offensive. And some of the families are also claiming that Netanyahu is sacrificing rather than demanding a hostage deal. What do you make of this?
Now, that's a great question. And isn't this the paradox and the dilemma of the situation? It is clear that Hamas militarily, through the actions of Netanyahu and the IDF, will no longer will no longer be the military threat that they once were. Also, politically, Hamas is losing credibility amongst Israel's closest Arab allies, such as Jordan, the UAE, and Egypt, and even the Palestinian Authority. But the pressure that Netanyahu is facing, the strongest pressure is coming from domestic sources, from people within Israel who are sick and tired about the way the war has been conducted, because the hostages are still in the hands of Hamas. So if this war is to end earlier than the Trump, going back to your previous question, if the war is to end earlier than the Trump administration is going to allow Netanyahu to proceed, the pressure will come for an end sooner rather than later from domestic internal politics and the thousands of people we've seen recently protesting against the conduct of the war and against Netanyahu and his government within Israel itself.
Speaking of domestic pressure, one last question before I let you go. Do you think Netanyahu will buckle under this?
He hasn't as yet, but then again, every day the pressure is increasing. So it's possible, or I feel doubtful, it's possible that domestic pressure will bring an end to the war, but I doubt it. But I assure you and your viewers that it will not be the Trump administration bringing pressure on Netanyahu or other world leaders that will see an end to this war. It will be the domestic pressure that Netanyahu faces internally.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Peterbaum, for taking our time speaking to us
My pleasure.
on NewsX World. Meanwhile, viewers, shifting focus to other news coming in. US President Donald Trump's 50% tariffs on India has now taken effect from today, hitting exports and growth in the world's fourth largest economy. The tariffs come as Trump says he is penalizing India for purchasing Russian oil and weapons. Trump has stated that he warned India that without de-escalation, there would be no trade deals and massive tariffs. Listen into what the US president has said.
Just like India and Pakistan, we're going to end up in a nuclear war if I didn't stop them. You know, it was sort of strange. I saw they were fighting. Then I saw 7 jets were shot down. I said, that's not good. That's a lot of jets, you know. $150 million planes were shot down. A lot of them, 7, maybe more than that. They didn't even report the real number. And I'm talking to a very terrific man, Modi of India. And I'm saying, what's going on with you in Pakistan? Then I'm talking to Pakistan on trade. I said, what's going on with you in India? And the hatred was tremendous. Now, this has been going on for a hell of a long time, like sometimes with different names for hundreds of years. But I said, what's going on? I said, I don't want to make a trade deal. No, we want to make a trade deal. I said, no, I don't want to make a trade deal with you. You're going to have a nuclear war. You guys are going to end up in a nuclear war. And that was very important to them. I said, call me back tomorrow, but we're not going to do any deals with you, or we're going to put tariffs on you that are so high. You were there, Howard, right? Yep. You're going to put tariffs on you that was so high, I don't give a damn. Your head's going to spin. You're not going to end up in a war. Within about 5 hours, it was done. It was done. Now, maybe it starts again. I don't know. I don't think so, but I'll stop it.
All right, there, of course, viewers, you've heard what Donald Trump has had to say. Meanwhile, in an earlier response, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi had promised tax cuts and a simplified 2-tier GST system in order to boost consumption and support small businesses. He also urged citizens and shop owners to promote Made in India products. Listen in.
रूस से बाहर का तेल खरीदता है, इसलिए इसके ऊपर 50% टैरिफ लगाते हैं। अगर हमारी वस्तुओं के ऊपर 50% का टैक्स लगता है, तो नेचुरल सी बात है, वो जो टैक्स बढ़ेगा तो कस्टमर भी जानता है जो चीज़ सस्ती होगी उसको लेगा, ना कि वो ज़्यादा वैल्यू को ऑफर करेगा।
अब इसकी वजह से ये दिक्कत ये आ रही है कि अब जैसे लोगों के प्राइसेस बढ़ गए, कोई भी सिंगल कमोडिटी को देखने के लिए अब बड़ी दिक्कत ये हो जाती है। सिंगल कमोडिटी को देखने के लिए अब उसको भी सिंगल पे भी उसको 50% करना पड़ रहा है। अब पहले तो बल्क होता था तो फिर भी एक बार के लिए चलो ठीक है पूरा बल्क, अब सिंगल भी किसी को कुछ भी ऑर्डर करना था तो वो टैक्स उसमें इतना बढ़ जाता है कि वो आउट ऑफ द रीच हो जाता है पर्सन के।
All right, viewers, there you've heard some of the residents, some of the small business owners in India highlighting how they could be impacted by these tariffs. Joining us on the broadcast is Professor Madhav Nalapat. He's the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you so much, Professor Nalapat, for taking our time speaking to NewsX. My first question, what do you foresee to be the immediate impact on trade, India-US bilateral trade, as well as the American consumer as far as these 50% tariffs are concerned?
Look, it's going to have a dampening effect on India-US trade. Make no mistake about that. And the fact of the matter is that we have a trade surplus in the United States, but the reality of the situation is it's going to have a dampening effect for some time. But the government is now working very hard to dismantle earlier restrictions and to promote much more ease of compliance. And I'm very certain that they're not going to use the threat of the stick. I mean, especially a stick that can electrocute, that can send you to prison. Because the fact is that sticks don't work as well as carrots do, and sticks can be evaded. And so that's why they're ineffective usually, practically. So I think the Prime Minister is working very hard to ensure that India basically gets through this storm of tariffs, and at the end of it, will be much better off. than what it was previous to this. If you remember, there was an economic crisis in 1991 and huge reforms came. There's a looming crisis of these tariffs in 2025, and I'm very certain 2025 itself is going to see major reforms by Prime Minister Modi.
Indeed, Professor Nalapat, you've spoken of reforms, and this is something that PM Modi has highlighted. He's spoken about GST reform in particular, the goods and service tax, in order to provide cuts in order to drive consumption as well. He's also given a very strong Buy in India message to all the consumers. Do you think now, with consumption driving up and the domestic economy being the thrust of India's GDP, the exact impact will not be as much as if we were mostly an export-oriented economy?
No, there's no doubt about that. India is frankly, exports are only a small part of the Indian gross national product, and it's heavily dependent on domestic consumption and domestic production, especially of food grains. That's why the Prime Minister cannot budge on food grains. Trump wants to dump surplus grain on India. He wants to dump surplus dairy products on India, and that will completely destroy the agriculture industry and the dairy industry. That's absolutely a no-go situation. So I would say that the reforms that Prime Minister, for example, simplifying GST, at present, if the minute you get an invoice, you are liable for GST. Now you send, the point is that sometimes the invoice that you send to a buyer, let's say, I mean, that chap takes months to respond, but you have to pay your GST at one shot. And second, for example, a GST slab, once you cross for 1 rupee about 20 lakhs a year, then the entire 20 lakhs plus 1 rupee gets subjected to GST, which frankly is not a good idea. So I know that the Prime Minister will be paying attention to these matters, and he'll making it much more, compliance friendly. And if I may say so, that involves taking down some of the draconian powers, because in practice, what happens is there are only a handful of corrupt officials. The overwhelming majority are honest, but these corrupt officials then game the system and use this kind of a threat to try and extort money from business people, especially small traders, small business, medium business. And medium business and small business is the foundation on which big business rests. Big business should not in India be just a labeling system for foreign-made items. They should produce on their own. And you can do that with a thriving MSME and SME system. So in my view, the Trump tariffs are a blessing in disguise, and you're going to see major reforms, and these are going to lead to important structural changes where SMEs and MSMEs come, and finally they become world champions. So eventually you might see them landing up on US shores. And I think as far as Trump is concerned, I think frankly, the way he's going, I'm not sure it's going to last for very much longer, this kind of, at least this kind of direction, because he's going completely opposed to what he promised to the electorate, and completely opposed to the MAGA base. And you can't neglect the MAGA base. You can't neglect your promises to the electorate when you're the President of the United States.
Speaking of the Trump administration and Trump's ostensible reason, they've claimed that these tariffs are in response to New Delhi buying Russian oil as well as Russian weaponry. Now, what's interesting is that India, we've definitely not caused the war in Ukraine. We've in fact repeatedly called for a peaceful end through dialogue since day one. And what's also interesting is that when India is attacked from Pakistan, rather than condemning what Pakistan does, there is just stone cold silence and an attempt to equate India and Pakistan. And now America is trying to tell us who we do business with and how. Why is Trump doing this?
Look, the fact of the matter is America is not what it was 100 years ago when it started its rise, and it's certainly not what it was even 20 years ago. And India is not what it was either what it was 100 years ago, which is a slave country, and 20 years ago, when it was still on the threshold of entering into really good development. Now we are reaching a stage of good development. We are the fastest growing major economy in the world, and I am very sure that the reforms that Prime Minister Modi will introduce will have double-digit growth. So as far as making sense of Trump is concerned, it's very difficult to make any sense out of it, because he's doing all kinds of things that are really upsetting his base. And after some time, that reaction is going to come, and there are going to be correctives on his action. But in between, I would like to say, India will go ahead with the reforms, and those are going to be very beneficial for a generation to come, if not more.
All right, Professor Nalapat, I request you to stay on with us. There's more news that we're tracking. US President Donald Trump has stated that US colleges will struggle without Chinese students. This comes amid backlash after he suggested he could let 600,000 Chinese college students into the country as part of trade talks with the economic rival. Meanwhile, Guo Jiakun, a spokesperson for China's foreign ministry, has now stated that China hopes that the US would follow through on Trump's statements on welcoming Chinese students and then stop the quote-unquote unprovoked harassment, interrogation and deportation of Chinese students. Listen to what Trump has to say.
Well, we think we're getting along very well with China. And I'm getting along very well with President Xi. I think it's very insulting to say students can't come here, because they'll go out and they'll start building schools and they'll be able to survive it. But I like that their students come here. I like that other countries' students come here. And you know what would happen if they didn't? Our college system would go to hell very quickly. You'd have, and it wouldn't be the top colleges. It would be colleges that struggle on the bottom. And you take out 300,000 or 600,000 students out of the system. I like having, and I told this to President Xi, that we're honored to have their students here. Now, with that, we check and we're careful and we see who's there, and Marco wants that. We're in the same position. But we have a tremendous college system, the best in the world, nobody even close. That's why China sends them here. And you can call it an industry if you want, but you're talking about millions of people. And I'm honored to have the students from China come here. And we're just getting along very well with China. And it's a different relationship than we had for years, where they took hundreds of billions of dollars, just sucked it right out of our country. They respect us again. I respect them.
All right, there, of course, we've heard what Donald Trump has had to say. Professor Nalapat still with us on the broadcast. What we've just heard is Trump making a 180-degree U-turn as far as his approach towards foreign students, especially Chinese foreign students, is concerned. Is this an example then of Trump finding it a little difficult to balance trade and economic considerations, especially since China does have a lot of control over rare earths, with his promises that he made to the MAGA base?
Look, the fact of the matter is that China is not just looking for trade. China is looking for world domination at the expense of the United States. And that's complete anathema to the MAGA base. And they're obviously reacting. The fact is that Trump can get 600,000 students, good students, for example, Indian students. Why doesn't he mention them? The tech industry in the United States runs on Indian Americans and Indian students, and Indian people who come there for work. And it contributes trillions of dollars to the US economy. So something is, he's got a very soft corner towards President Xi. He's got a very soft corner towards China, probably because he doesn't read Mandarin. He doesn't read the Chinese dialects. You can find that in social media in China, all over the place, there's utter venom against him, and they're making fun of him. They're making fun of him in so many different posts. So I think we must excuse his ignorance, since he doesn't know Mandarin, he doesn't know any of the dialects in Chinese. He doesn't know. how much the Chinese people whom and Xi Jinping, by the way, the party has very tight control over social media in China. It doesn't do anything without going through the party seal, as it were. So Donald Trump is blissfully unaware of all the rubbish that's being spread about him. And he is, it really baffles me how we can call President Xi a good friend. President Xi is out to replace the United States, displace the US. Is that what President Trump wants?
Indeed. Thank you so much, Professor Nalapat, for joining us on the broadcast today, of course, sharing your perspective on this very, very crucial development. Meanwhile, viewers, we're shifting our focus to Australia. We're now learning that police in the Australian state of Victoria have released a photograph of a suspected gunman who allegedly shot dead 2 officers and injured another while they were serving a warrant at his rural property. A police manhunt for the suspect, identified as 56-year-old Daisy Freeman, also referred to as Desmond Philby, entered its 2nd day today. The man allegedly opened fire on a group of officers yesterday, killing a 59-year-old detective and a 35-year-old senior constable, and seriously injuring another detective before fleeing on foot into the dense bushland. Now, according to reports, Philby had previously been arrested at an anti-government protest in 2021. All right, viewers, shifting focus away from Australia towards what's happening in India. Now, heavy rain and landslides have hit northern India, killing at least 34 people and disrupting amenities. Now, a landslide near the Vaishno Devi shrine claimed 30 lives, while flooding last week in Kishtwar left 60 dead and 200 missing. The Indian Meteorological Department forecasts more rain and storms for Ladakh, Himachal Pradesh and Jammu and Kashmir. Authorities, meanwhile, are working to restore electricity, water and telecommunications as rivers overflow and bridges collapse. Listen in to what some of the tourists have said.
से मैं आया है बिहार का चंपारण डिस्ट्रिक्ट का है। मेरा नाम है दशरथ राउत। हम यहाँ पर आए हैं, यहाँ पर फंस गए हैं। ट्रेन जो थी वो बंद हो चुकी है। हम लोग जाने के कठिनाई है किस तरह हम लोग बिहार पहुंचे। हम लोग अपना दर्शन का कराए, हम लोग दर्शन करके आराम से चले आए। जब आए तो सुने जो बहुत बड़ा घटना हो गया वहाँ, लेकिन हम लोग उनके थी से मैं दरबार से सबसे उतर आए। हम लोग माता के थी से हम लोग बारिश के मारे फंस गए यहाँ पर। उसके बाद हम लोग जाने का हम लोग का दिक्कत हो रहा, कोई साधन नहीं है। ट्रेन बंद हो चुका है।
Apart from this, we're also learning that a massive rescue operation has been launched in the Pargwal area, where about 20 Jawans of the Border Security Force have been stuck in the flash floods, even as rescue operations are taking place over there. A lot of NDRF teams have been deployed, whether in Srinagar, Udhampur, Riyashi, Kishtwar, Jammu and Samba. So rescue operations are in full swing. Meanwhile, joining us on the broadcast is Mr. Ajit Kumar. He's the Managing Director of the Khushi Gram Foundation, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX. It's very unfortunate what is taking place in Jammu and Kashmir. 34 people have lost their lives up until now. Do you know of people who are stuck there, and what is the situation on ground? What are they telling you?
See, actually, now since some trains have been restored, so it has become slightly easy to rescue and for the relief operations, and also for the forces also to reach there. But the situation is still very challenging and tough, because the kind of terrain we have there and the kind of the numbers of pilgrims also visiting, it's really tough now. And everywhere we are seeing the same thing, the Himachal and before that Uttarakhand. So we have to be very cautious. The real challenge is being cautious, take extra action and strong action on this. So I think the forces are doing good, but still we need to be aware, and there has to be more training on this, of not only at schools and colleges, but for the masses everywhere.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. With that, viewers, we must wrap up this bulletin due to paucity of time. More news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned on NewsX World.